Right, hello everyone, and welcome to what I believe, if I've been counting correctly, is the 8th Dialogue webinar. My name is Morten Kromberg. You'll notice if you look carefully that my face isn't quite as animated as it usually is. My lips are not moving. So I wasn't able to make it to Bramley today. Adam's going to be doing most of this presentation, and he's also written most of the code, so that's very appropriate. But before he sets off, I'd like to say a few words about today's topic. We're going to be talking today about synchronizing namespaces and directories. And what we mean by that is that we want to synchronize the tree of namespaces that you might have in a workspace. We're going to be using an imaginary small application, which you can see the structure of here. There's a main application namespace called my app, which has a sub namespace called math. There'll be functions in each of those. And then there's going to be a second namespace containing utility functions used by the application code. Outside the workspace, we have a directory structure where the source code for the functions that's in these namespaces is going to be stored. We're going to be using a very simple structure where we have, for each function we have in the workspace, we have one source file in the file structure. And we want to be sure that wherever we decide to make changes to our code, whether we edit code within the workspace using tools that are part of the APL IDE, or we use external editors or source code management systems that make changes on the outside of the APL application, that we keep everything in sync. At least we want to be offered the opportunity to synchronize when a change happens. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, Dyalog has been recommending for, I think, nearly a decade now that you move in this direction of storing your source code in text files rather than the monolithic binary workspace that has been traditional for APL through the ages. The reason for that, well, first of all, it allows you to use many really excellent source code management systems, products with names like Git, Subversion, CVS, Mercurial, just to name some of the most widely used, and also a huge collection of other tools that various communities have created to help you manage source code, build, test, distribute applications, move in the direction of continuous integration of your applications. There are a number of graphical front ends. This is just a random collection, things like GitKraken, Sourcetree, Bitbucket. Beyond Compare is a file comparison tool, GitHub. Some of these we use regularly at Dyalog, the ones that are highlighted now. Git is our main source code management system at least within the APL tools group. GitHub is a service that we use on the internet to give other people access to those libraries, share them outside our own little group. And Sourcetree is a graphical front end that we use on top of the source code management systems. So this is something that I believe is going to become really important also as we move towards situations where we might want to combine writing code in APL with HTML files, XML configuration files, and so on. And it's really useful to keep everything in the same place. So I'm going to hand over to Adam now for the rest of this webinar, but I will be joining the chat and try to do my best to help answer questions as they come in. So over to you, Adam.
Right, thank you, Morten. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our workspace with namespace in it and several namespaces in it, and we're going to have some directories that are on the file system, and we're going to link those up. And then when changes happen, APL is going to offer us to synchronize those changes and carry over whatever is new or changed in one place to the other side. Let me show you of things that are coming up in version 17. Here's APL, and here's the file system. So we're going to start a new project, a little application. Let's call it My App. In order to keep our code organized, we're going to put everything that's in our all the code of our application inside the namespace. So now I've created this namespace. And now we're going to create our main function in the namespace. We're going to take an argument, return a result, but the actual work is going to be done in a function called foo. Right there. So already now we can look at the structure of our workspace with a user command called map. So this draws a map of the workspace, hash, that is the root of the workspace, and we have a namespace inside called myapp, and it has, the symbol means that it's a function, so that means we have one function called start. So far we are only inside APL, but we're going to link this namespace, myapp, to the file system over here. This. So we're going to create a new directory in the root of C with a name that matches. Could be any name, but this is appropriate to keep things in order. And Windows has updated the view of the hard disk. It has shown us this directory. Let's go look what's inside. Here's our function start. Here's the code for start. Remember, start calls a function foo. We haven't defined that yet. So now let's go define the function foo. Here we go. And right away, APL says the function start is in this myapp namespace. And there's now a new, and that namespace is linked to a specific directory on the file system. But now there's a new function in the namespace that doesn't exist as a file on the file system in the directory. So APL says there's a discrepancy. Do you want to create a new file corresponding to this function in that directory? So yes, we want to do that. And very soon, the view in the folder is updated, and here's the new function, foo, as its own file. Here's the code. But wait, we made a mistake. Foo doesn't actually do anything yet. It's just a header. So notice here we're outside of APL. I'm going to take this text file and open it with my favorite text editor. This could be any editor. So this means, because we're saving the code as text, any third-party tool that can read text can deal with this file and edit it. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. And I'm going to write some code. Here we go. And save that. As soon as I do that, APL says there's been a change to the file in a directory which is linked to our namespace. So we're out of sync, and it offers us to synchronize, that is to take the new code of this file and put it into the function in the namespace appropriately. So we want to do that. And now if we go and edit the function, we can see that the code that we wrote in the external utility has been imported. Now we're going to do one more thing. We're going to open up the text editor. So this is again outside of APL and working from scratch. We're not editing anything, we're making a new file with a new function. And I'm going to save this file at the appropriate location. And it's a good idea to keep the file names and what's inside them the same. Now I've saved the file, and APL has detected that there's a new file in this directory. It's right here. And it has offers us to import this content of this file into the same namespace on the APL side where the other files that are in the same directory are linked to. So we're going to do this, and now we can get a map of our workspace again, and we can now see that my app has 3 functions: start, foo, and goo, and it was carried over. We can open it up and have a look. You can see this is indeed what we saved with the external utility. So this means I can use any third-party tool to create functions, and they will immediately be represented on the APL side. So if you have any questions, please join us in on the chat and I'll attempt to answer you. So continuing with our application, we are going to import some utilities, some third-party utilities into our application so we can use them. So let's go online. This is GitHub's search page. So all those public code repositories that are out there on GitHub are searchable here. And we can search for some APL utilities. Look at that. Here is a utility library that I've prepared for the webinar. You can go and look at the information that's there about it. And this looks good. This is what we need. So I take the address of this repository of code, and I'm going to start Sourcetree that Morten mentioned before. And we're going to clone this repository from this address. GitHub Sourcetree suggests a location for it, but I'm going to choose a different location. And clone. So now Sourcetree is downloading this repository, and this gives us a history of things that have happened in this repository. We can go in and see the details. It will show us what were the exact changes, who made the changes, when were they made, and you can search around in things. I can open up the files. If you go back on the disk, we can see that the appropriate folder that I requested in Sourcetree has been created. Here's the utils inside, and it has these 2 directories, strings and math, and each of them have some functions inside. So this looks good. This is what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the file path for this utility directory, and we're going to map it into a corresponding namespace. Right here. Let's get a map of the workspace, and we can see that this link user command has now imported everything in utils into the workspace, and the two directories that are inside utils are now corresponding to two namespaces that are inside this utils namespace. Everything is linked up. Let's open up one of these functions. Here's the code. This looks great, but the code isn't commented. So let's put a comment in. And then we save that. Now if we go into the folder, corresponding folder, and look at the file, we can see that of course it has been updated because they're linked. Now, not only I should benefit from this improvement to this function, everybody else should too. So I can push back my changes using Sourcetree. So here we're back in Sourcetree, which is the GUI front end to the Git system, and the Git system that we are using here is the Git system that is on GitHub. And there's a lot of information here, but we can pick out that the hex file has been modified. One of the reasons I like Sourcetree is because it allows me to select the font of this diff view, it's called, where you can see the differences between the previous and the next version. So it's telling me that this line up here has been replaced with this line that I wrote. That's good. However, I've gotten a notification up here, and this tells me that while I've been working, there has been a change to the online repository on GitHub, so it is not synchronized with what I have locally on my machine. So I'm going to pull this change. This means to download it and update my local version. And I can now see in the history here that Morten has been adding a new function trim in the strings directory that has been added, and here's the code that he has written. Yes, that looks good. This is what we want, but there are also uncommitted changes. These are my changes that are over here. Meanwhile, over on the APL side, APL has asked me a question. It has noticed that a new file has appeared in one of the directories that we are watching and synchronizing with our namespaces. And so it's asking me whether I want to import this change, this new file, the contents of the new file, to my workspace, put it in the correct location. And yes, sure, I want to do that. And if we look at the map again of the workspace, you can see that we now have in the strings namespace, we now have a new function trim, which is the one that Morten made. Let's go back over in Sourcetree. Meanwhile, we have the uncommitted changes, the hex file. I'm going to, to move this over from unstaged files, which are things that are just local by me, to stage files, which are things that I want to push up in the cloud to GitHub. And I'm going to write a message about what I have done. So again, we can inspect the changes, have just one last look, and then I'm going to write a message for everybody else to read. So that they will know what this change is, and they can also get the change by them. I'm going to make a commit. That means I'm going to say that this is the way I want the code to be, and I'm going to immediately also push it to GitHub. That means to upload it there. It means Morten can get this. Now that has been uploaded. So this is some of the things that you will be able to do with version 17, due to come out this coming summer. Any questions so far? Please participate in the chat. I'll take a moment to get your questions and answer them. Okay, I can see that Morten is busy answering questions. That means I will proceed. Now, this is not done. We haven't released it yet because there are things still to consider. We haven't settled yet on exactly what the name of this user command should be, and there might be some extra user commands to deal with similar things and related problems. It could be that the user command needs some options in the form of modifiers, and all this we're going to sort out. We need to deal with what happens when the workspace is closed or other things go wrong, handling that. And also, if you have a workspace with linked namespaces to directories and save that, and then while APL is closed, or at least the workspace is not active, then there are changes made on the file system. Of course, when I load the saved workspace, then we want to re-establish all the linking, and if there have been changes, then we want to offer the user again to synchronize all those changes into the workspace. So one of the questions that have been asked is, what do we do about uppercase and lowercase on Windows? And this also applies to other similar file names on Mac OS. As opposed to on Linux, where you can have two different files in the same directory with two different with names, but the only difference is the casing. You can't usually do that on Windows. But also in APL, you can have, of course, in the same namespace, two different items where the only difference in the names between them are uppercase and lowercase. Now the system, as you've seen it now, does not handle that yet, but there are proposals and there are systems out there that can handle this by appending suffixes to the file names that are picked up as being not part of the name. And same thing if we try to save something that has a name that would clash, then we can append a suffix to the name when we save it. Another problem that could happen is if I'm editing a function, it's open in the editor, and then while I'm doing this, the file that it corresponds to in the file system has been changed. Now when I try to close the editor and APL is ready to save back the changes to the file, you will see that the file meanwhile has changed. So now there is a conflict. Should we discard the changes I've just made in APL, or should we just overwrite the things that have been changed on the file system? This could, for example, happen if I link my namespaces to directories that are on a network, so other people have writability to that same directory. So this is something we need to sort out. How do we deal with this kind of problem? All this will be, of course, ready in time for release for 17.0. the system that you've seen is implemented using Microsoft.NET, and this cannot just be ported to other platforms. However, we will be looking into having a similar support on all platforms, of course. So, if there are no more questions, I will wrap this part of the webinar up. .17.0 will allow you to keep working in the APL workspace environment. This means you can do all the dynamic programming and you can do all the interactive programming just like you've been doing until now. But at the same time, you will be able to have your code be in text files on the disk with all the benefits that come with that and all the tools that can work with that. Now, before we stop for today, I would like to speak about another subject that's very dear to me, and that is Stack Exchange. Stack Exchange is a community-driven network that is primarily for question and answers on programming and other computer-related issues, but also on a lot of other subjects. A part of the Stack Exchange network is the chat functionality, and people can create chat rooms for various subjects. I've created a chat room, and you have the address here, where the subject is APL. There are people there 24/7, and people there are often solving problems together, asking questions, getting help with various issues, solving them together, even making challenges for each other. It's a really good place to be. You can get there not just by going to this address. You can also go to the Dyalog's website, and in the menu under Community, there's a link to Stack Exchange chat room that will take you there. It's a really good place just to be always logged in there and communicate with the people. Good place to meet up. One of the things that goes on there is that we have a chatbot. This chatbot looks at the messages that people write in the chat room, and any message that begins with a quad gets or a code quad gets, the chatbot will pick up and evaluate that using the Try It Online system, and it will ping the user who wrote the message back with the result. So in effect, this makes the chat room somewhat similar to an APL session. There's no retained state, but it's good enough for evaluating one-liners. Then we have weekly learning sessions. Every Wednesday afternoon, we have about an hour and a half of a lesson that I teach. We have a new subject every week. Feel free to join in there. And if you have missed lessons, then you can click on info in the info link in the chat room, and you can go to the conversations view, and you can find an index of all the past lessons and read the transcript for each lesson. Then if you have any questions about things that were covered there in a lesson, feel free to ping me and ask me questions. I'll get back to you as soon as possible, usually very quickly. Now, the main functionality of Stack Exchange is the ability to ask general questions on subjects. And on programming, of course, APL falls under that. There are already a few APL questions, and I'm proud to say that no APL question has been left unanswered. In general, they are answered very quickly. And posting your APL questions on Stack Exchange has a huge benefit over other places. Because it gets a lot of exposure, you are going to get a lot of different answers, different ways to attack your problem, and that can help you much better than getting a single answer from a single person can. So, have an APL question, a general one, go on Stack Overflow. That is the part of the Stack Exchange network for programming questions, and post your questions there. You will be surprised. It works really well. And that's it for this webinar. Join us again every month, a late Thursday of every month. The next subject up on March 22nd is going to be total array ordering, which is the concept that grade and interval index in version 17 will be able to deal with any arrays whatsoever. So until now in APL you've only been able to grade and sort simple numeric arrays or simple character arrays, and this has now been extended to handle any type of array really. This has a lot of benefits, and Jay Fode and I are going to present some examples of this, explain how the system works, and show you what this can be used for. If you would like influence on what future webinar subjects are going to be, then please send an email to webinar@dialog.com. We would also like comments, of course. Or you can drop into the chat room and type @A, it will autocomplete to my name, and feel free to come with suggestions, ask me questions, give comments and feedback to this and other webinars, and we will get back to you and take your input. So thank you very much for joining today. If there are any last questions, I will take them now, so take a moment. Right, so if there aren't any questions, I will end up for today. Thank you for joining in, and see you next month.